Energy recharge is one of the most important parts of Genshin Impact, but it's often overlooked. People underestimate how useful it can be, and their teams struggle needlessly as a result. This video will help you understand what it is, how it works, what you can do to affect it, and how that should influence your character builds, teams, and even how you play the game. Energy in Genshin is a resource generated during combat, which allows your characters to use their elemental bursts. On my first playthrough, my character struggled to generate energy, and as a result, I found myself saving my bursts until I felt I really needed them. This made my teams much weaker than they should have been, and made the game more difficult than it was meant to be. At the other extreme, it's possible to have too much energy recharge, which also results in a weaker team overall. Fixing my team's energy recharge problems let me use their bursts more often, which made my teams far more powerful and made the game exponentially more enjoyable as a result. If you find yourself holding back your bursts, or you have characters who struggle to fill their energy meter quickly or fill them far too fast, there's actually a lot you can do to fix that problem. Let's take a look at how energy is generated, touch on how it is used, and then explore how this affects how we build characters and teams, and how we actually play the game. The most visible part of the energy system are elemental particles. Particles are brightly colored points of light which streak towards your character during battle. Particles appear, for example, when you hit an enemy with an elemental skill, with some exceptions, when a Favonia's weapon's passive is triggered, when an enemy's HP falls beyond a certain percentage, or when a team with 2 or more electro characters triggers an electro-related reaction. When you pick up a particle, it generates energy for the entire party. Each particle is worth 1 energy point, but the amount of energy each point provides to each character depends on a number of factors. First, most particles are colored to match one of the elements. Characters who match the particle's element will gain 3 times as much energy compared to characters who do not match the particle's element. There are also clear particles, which look bright white in-game, which always provide double the typical amount of energy. The amount of energy gained also depends on whether the character is actively on-field. The on-field character gets the full amount of energy, while the off-field characters get a reduced amount. The size of that reduction depends on how many characters are in the party. The more party members, the less energy each off-field character receives. Finally, each character's energy recharge stat multiplies the amount of energy they receive. We'll go into that in more detail in a minute. Elemental orbs are another important part of this system. An elemental orb is an extra-large particle. Orbs are created only when an enemy HP falls below a certain percentage, and they are usually dropped by larger enemies only. Orbs do not float towards you unless you're close enough to them, and they disappear fairly quickly. Each orb provides 3 energy points, so they're worth paying attention to. All the other details of particles which we just touched on also apply to orbs. They have elements, the same factors affect how much energy each party member gains from each orb, and energy recharge applies in the same way. There are a few other ways to gain energy, though they usually provide a much smaller portion of the energy you need. Normal and charged attacks have a small chance to generate 1 energy point for the attacking character on every hit. The chance of generating this energy depends on the character's weapon and increases slightly with each attack until the energy is generated. When a character generates energy this way, their vision will flash for a moment, which is a nice subtle detail that is easily missed. Some weapons and artifact sets also generate energy. The Favonia's weapons are the most commonly used since they generate 3 clear particles when their passive triggers, which provides energy for the entire team. Several other weapons generate a specific amount of energy in certain situations, provided to the character wielding the weapon only. For example, the prototype Amber provides energy when the wielder uses their burst. This can still be highly valuable for characters who need lots of energy. Finally, a 4-piece Scholar and Exile artifact sets generate energy for multiple characters in the team in certain situations. These are generally very powerful and useful sets early on in the game, but unfortunately are not available as 5-star artifacts, and as a result are rarely worth it once you're later on into the game. Many characters also have talents or constellations which provide them a small energy boost in certain circumstances. These are the kinds of details which make a small difference on their own, but can be surprisingly valuable when all the things work together. It's worth noting that your character's energy recharge stats only affect energy gained from elemental particles and orbs. All of these other ways to gain energy completely ignore energy recharge. So that's all the details of how to gain energy. Now that we've generated some, we get to use our character's bursts. Bursts are flashy moves which consume the character's stored energy and unleash the elemental power to maximum effect. Each burst is unique and is often a vital part of the character's abilities, providing a large proportion of the damage or support they bring to the team. Each character's burst has a specific energy requirement. For the characters released so far, the lowest energy requirement is 40 energy points and the highest is 90. When a character's energy meter is full, their burst is available for use and they stop gaining energy. This also has a subtle visual indicator. When you switch to a character, if their burst is available, their vision will flash with the symbol of their element. After using a burst, its cooldown begins. The cooldown of each burst depends on its energy requirement. The higher the energy requirement, the longer the cooldown. The burst cannot be used again until the cooldown ends, even if the character regains a full energy meter before then. So how does this affect how we build characters and teams? The first thing to note is that many characters do not rely on their burst all that much, and it's more of an afterthought which isn't essential to use regularly. For example, Ayato's burst gives him a bit of damage boost and applies Hydro, but the majority of his value comes from his skill, and as a result, it's common for people to feel comfortable without using his burst in every rotation. In contrast, Cyno is extremely reliant on his burst and feels extremely weak whenever it is not available. For characters like Cyno, it's important to ensure they have enough energy to use their burst when needed. For characters like Ayato, it's usually nice to have, but a lower priority than other stats. Which leads us to the next point. How do you increase your character's energy recharge stat? The main source of a character's energy recharge stat is their equipment. Many weapons provide ER as their substat, and some also have passives which can boost the character's energy recharge. The Favonius weapon set is particularly valuable here, since they have an energy recharge stat and also generate particles through their passive. The downside is that the passive is triggered by critical hits, so to use them, you might need to build crit rate onto a character who would otherwise not need crit, sacrificing some of their other important stats instead. Artifacts are also a prime source of energy recharge. Artifacts in the Sands category can have an ER main stat, and all artifacts can have ER as a substat. Most DPS characters prefer a different Sands to an energy recharge one, since it's often easier to increase a character's energy generation through other means than it is to increase their damage output. There are some exceptions to this though. For example, Raiden has a special passive which increases her electro damage bonus based on her energy recharge stat, so an energy recharge Sands can be more powerful to her than an attack Sands. For support characters, it depends on how their skills scale and how important their burst is. Many who are reliant on their burst will likely want an ER Sands, but many others are better off with something else. Also, of particular note is the Emblem of Severed Fate artifact set. This is one of the most commonly used artifact sets because it is a 5-star artifact set with 2-piece bonus which provides 20% energy recharge. The 4-piece set is highly valuable for many energy-hungry DPS or sub-DPS characters. Some characters also gain energy recharge as their ascension stat, which means they get a slight head start compared to the rest of the characters. Since this is something inherent to the characters who have the ascension stat, it's not really something worth focusing on. Due to the sheer number of different factors which affect how energy recharge works, it can be extremely difficult to figure out how much a character actually needs. To get an idea of what to aim for, I first try them in a rainbow team to see how quickly they gain energy in normal combat. I make sure that the other characters do not provide a whole lot of energy, do not have the Favonius weapons equipped, and so on. This type of team does not take advantage of any of the ways to increase energy, so it's a great way to see how easily the character gets their burst back. Once we have that baseline, it's easier to tell how well a character would work in other teams built to provide more energy to them, and estimate what target to aim for. So how do we build a team to provide energy to a character? One obvious way is to equip one of the characters with weapons or other equipment which helps the entire team's energy needs. We've already touched on the Favonius weapon set a couple of times, but another good example of this is the Siphos Moonlight Sword. Siphos Moonlight is a sword whose passive provides bonus energy recharge to the entire team. If you have this sword available, plus a character who can use it, it can be a vital part of the team's strength as a whole. Another simple way to provide more energy is to consider including another character from the same element. Since the particles generated by a character's skill always match their elemental type, adding someone with a matching element means we can take advantage of the triple energy absorption boost for matching particles. As yet another option, we can consider looking to include a character who works as a battery. Each character's skill generates a specific number of particles, and some generate significantly more than others do. A character who generates a high number of particles is known as a battery, a role for a character who can quickly refill the entire team's bursts. Many teams built to focus on one powerful DPS character with an expensive burst rely on this concept of a battery role to function smoothly. This is even more effective when the battery character also happens to match the element of the energy-hungry character. It's also important to note that if your character's burst bursts are regularly available long before the cooldowns end, then it's a sign that you can reduce their energy recharge stat. When this happens, it's worthwhile trying to adjust your artifacts and weapons to do so. If your characters in this team have weapons or artifacts which provide ER, you could swap those with others which increase a different stat, boost your overall team damage, and still keep enough energy recharge to have your bursts available when the cooldowns end. Ultimately, it's better to have too much energy recharge than too little, so always aim as high as possible first and make adjustments based on need and equipment availability. Finally, there are a couple more subtle things we can do during battle to ensure our characters have their burst available at the right moment. When a character uses a skill, there is a slight delay before they catch the particles. This delay is long enough that we can switch to a different character who would then benefit from those particles more due to being on field. It can often be worthwhile to use one character's skill and then switch to a different energy hunger character to catch those particles and gain an extra boost. Conversely, it can also be worth deliberately delaying your character switch for a second or so to ensure that the character who used the skill collects the maximum possible energy from using that skill. This can be particularly important in very energy-hungry teams like Ride and Sunfire, which have time built into each rotation for using character skills to generate their energy. Taking a little extra time to ensure each character catches their own particles helps this team recharge much faster. Another useful detail which is worth paying attention to is that when a character's burst is ready, its symbol appears next to their name. While it can be hard to keep an eye on it in the midst of a difficult battle, if you can get used to keeping this in mind, you can avoid swapping to a character prematurely. A slightly less useful detail is that when a character's burst meter is full, their vision glows. Similarly, the elemental symbol flashes by their vision in certain situations, either when the active character's meter fills up or when you switch to a character who already has their meter full. These are harder to spot and are a bit too subtle to make much of a difference. Energy recharge is a surprisingly nuanced area of Genshin's combat system and is well worth diving into. Making sure your team's energy recharge needs are met can mean the difference between barely clearing the abyss and getting full stars. Hopefully this video has helped shine light into some of the more obscure corners and made it clearer what changes you can make to improve your teams. Until next time!